All right, you're live.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Sure, that's okay with Chad. Okay.
Eight.
Brian, do you want to start?
I mean, we specifically left off at this point because Alicia wanted to, I mean, I guess we could come back to it if you wanted to skip over when we get into the discussion of that policy.
Back to the 31.
Yeah, that's fine, because that in conjunction with 5202 was the one that she particularly wanted to talk about, so. All right, sounds good. All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Brighton Board of Education Committee of the Whole meeting. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, take a quick roll call. Ms. Mitchell? Here. Mr. Conley? Here. Mr. Trombley?
Yes.
Dr. Krebs? Here. Mr. Myers? Here. All right, at this time, we will do a call to the public. If there's anyone here that would like to address the board during the call to the public, there are cards at the back of the table. I will read your name, and you will have 3 minutes to come up and address the board. When your time has 30 seconds left, Dr. Krebs will give you a 30-second yellow card warning. And when your time is completed, the red card will be given to indicate that your time is up. So as of right now, I have one card. It is Jason Ringett.
Make that two. Go ahead, Jason.
Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Because rebelling, the Bible says, 2 Corinthians 3, their minds were blinded. 2 Corinthians 4 says, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers. There's a veil. There's a blindness over the minds of the leaders and politicians. The Bible teaches Jesus Christ. He said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Outside of Christ, there's no ultimate truth. DEI needs to be eliminated. Violates Article 1, Section 26 of the Michigan Constitution. It's unconstitutional in our schools to have discrimination and to give preferential treatment over one race or the other. It's time that the school board rescind the emergency powers that were given to the superintendent. Some school board members were hell-bent on masking and healthy quarantines on our kids. Why is Brighton School Board allowing the teachers union to have an office within the schools? It's illegal under U.S. or Michigan law. All hiring of new teachers need to go through the school board and administrators, not the union leaders. So we know for the past 2 years in America, our kids have lost 2 years of education due to COVID, pushing left-wing agendas on our kids like CRT, DEI, SEL, LGBTQ is nothing more than smoke and mirrors and brainwashing our kids to think a certain way. Advisory 15-minute class is CRT, and it's nothing more than smoke and mirrors. Take that extra 15 minutes and add on to kids' recess. Stop dumbing down academics. Get back to educating our kids. In 2018, Brighton High School was in the top 3.5% in education nationally out of almost 2,000 schools in America. Those promoting Horacio Sanchez is another controversial figure that has nothing to do with educating our kids in math, science, reading, writing, to make our schools successful, for our kids successful after graduating Brighton schools. Our kids were affected by enormous harms causing long-lasting damage to our kids. Masking, isolating, and quarantining healthy children introduced massive fear in them, damaging them to thinking that they were vectors of disease and everyone who was in danger from everyone else. We haven't seen the tip of the irreversible damage that has been done to our children. We have seen skyrocketing self-harm, suicidal ideation, mental illness skyrocketing, child abuse going on, unreported, massive surges in childhood obesity, public health problems, and serious learning loss. The Florida Public Education sent a letter to K through 12th grade schools telling them schools to disregard the Biden administration rules of public revision on Title IX money prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity. Both the U.S. Department of Education, the U.S. Agriculture has threatened to withhold funds to U.S. institutions. If they fail to implement the new revisions, Brighton schools can disregard these revisions because they are only a guidance. They do not force laws. Only Congress makes laws. They are not binding, so do not modify your practice or procedures based on these documents. They do not make laws. Only Congress does. Nothing in these laws documents gives biological males access to female restrooms, locker rooms, or co-ed sports. Didn't we see this before with school boards pushing illegal mask mandates, guidelines, and recommendations on our school kids? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Connor.
Good evening, Board. It appears we don't have an agenda, so I can't add board reports to the agenda that we don't have. And it appears that we didn't publish an agenda, what we're going to do here tonight about hiring new employees. Now we're doing policy committee. Well, somebody's in charge of that. I don't know who. So because we're not going to do an agenda, so we can't put board reports on it, I have some parent concerns that were brought to me. Those parent concerns have to do with a 15-minute class that's going to be held at Scranton Schools, Scranton Middle School, 5 days a week. Our administration believed it wasn't going to, didn't know originally it would be 5 days. They thought it was shorter. You'll have to ask them yourselves. And I haven't been given the curriculum for that program yet. So the questions were specifically by the parent, just like the health class, is there a way to opt out of it? I thought that was a realistic question. And she also asked me for the curriculum. I said, I don't have it. And then she asked, if I might for a second, I'll get my notes. All right, turn your clock back on. Is there an opt-out form? No different than dissection for frogs in health class, or not health class, but in science class. Kids don't have to dissect frogs if they don't want to. The health class, which we know we had opt-out. Specifics on the syllabus and the curriculum that's going to be mandatorily taught to the students. And also what law or regulation allows this to be mandatory teaching without any curriculum approval. Also, there's significant knowledge that there's people within Scranton Middle School that would like to have unsolicited mental health care for the children. Now, without an agenda tonight, we have no way to address this before school starts. So I'll just make a recommendation that we adopt an agenda tonight and open the floor and approve an agenda. We'll be voting on hiring new staff, which is an agenda item. And this policy adoption committee that's underway is an agreed on thing. That's not an issue. But this is an open board meeting and we're voting on business of the school district. Thank you.
All right, so picking up where we left off with the last policy reviews, Ms. Reed had asked that we start with 3118. She is delayed and won't be here for a little while. So let's skip over that and let's pick up then Mr. Scaling with 3119, and then we'll just continue forward accordingly.
Just to give a frame of reference, we've had, this will be our third of our transition meetings. They're all publicly recorded. This is recorded as well. But just for the audience that's here, we met the first time, I believe, on August 18th, 24th. This is a continuation of that meeting. This is all part of the transition from Neola to Troon. So we're continually going through policies. At a later date, when all of this work is done, the full board will debate and make decisions regarding whether this is approved or not. We're just giving you a frame of reference where we're at. This is the third meeting, and we'll get as far as we can this evening.
Roger, if I might, on that note, on our agenda for tonight is to vote on these vote on the hires. And I was told that this was the first part of the agenda for tonight, because I can't stay the whole evening. So what's their
Well,
status?
I mean, look, if you want to have an agenda posted and have it on our meeting, we have a meeting, what, the 6th? The 6th?
Obviously, our preference would be to vote on that tonight, but we do not have an agenda, so if we're taking issue with that, then we will delay.
I'm not taking any issue because what I want to do, Dr. Outlaw, in all specifics here, it's going to be somebody else takes an issue with this because this is technically an open meetings violation. I was told to come and vote on this topic tonight, specifically.
Well, it's not an open meetings violation.
How isn't it?
Because agendas, the publication of agendas are not required to be part of any committee meeting, frankly, any board meeting. I mean, we do that as a matter of course, but it's not required.
So don't we have to post that we're going to vote on these things?
You don't have to post as part of a posting of a meeting. You don't have to have an agenda.
I see.
But for the sake of if there's people that would like to appear for a meeting to address the issue, I have no problem pushing it to a future meeting. It's fine. I mean,
I came to vote on it, but I can't stay because I want to get my vote in on this topic. And I wanted to have a vote. I wanted to make a motion to do, like I said, where we would have a board report specifically to some parent concerns. So if we're not violating agendas, then we can vote on this and get that behind us. Because I was told this would be first on the list of the agenda to do.
so whatever the concern that you raised in the call to the public about a curriculum,
Yes.
that's a separate issue. I got no problem as part of a committee of the whole having that conversation. Well, I mean, it's a
This
committee.
is time sensitive though, and this was a board meeting called with all board members present in a quorum to address specifics for the needs of the students. That was why I brought it, because it's time sensitive and school's going to start. And this board may not want to have that program run until we figure out what's going on. And we have no other way to have a board influence on that program except by having it in this meeting, is my point. And I feel that my voice is restricted to bring forward the voice of our public in this form that we're carrying this meeting on, because we didn't open it with an agenda that would be normally, is there an agenda to approve? There's no agenda to approve. There's no agenda here to approve. It's an agenda that's not written.
We've never approved an agenda for a committee of the whole meeting.
This is committee of the
This is
whole.
the committee of the whole.
We added, just a minute, we added contracts to this where we're going to hire teachers.
We're we're approving a human resources report, which would include the hiring of teachers.
Which makes it not just a committee meeting. This is a combined meeting with this. That's what I'm saying. I understand your position though, and I understand it should be just fine. But this makes it more business of the school district and not just a committee.
Okay, so if you want to start with, I mean, unless there's an objection from me, in other words, if you want to start with this issue that you believe is a pressing emergency, I have no problem.
It's an emergency.
I
I
have
believe
no
it's,
problem with you raising it, John. I mean,
I appreciate that.
that's why we're here in a committee of the whole.
I'd like
So,
to vote on this project and on this regarding our teachers, and we can decide if we can stay and help you on this other stuff.
all right, so the floor is yours. Tell us what your concern is.
My concern is, like I said, a call to the public, is a parent came to my office today and voiced their concerns on this 15 minutes, 5 days per week class that's going to be taught to all students without curriculum. And she recited her concerns, and she was concerned that one of our counselors would take liberties that they don't like, because the counselor in the past has shown poor discretion in those areas, and it has a record of poor discretion in her file. And she'll be part of this in a roundabout way as the weeks come on. The first few weeks will be organized by administration, and after that, it'll get a little more free rein once they get a handle on it. And, I can see a day of this a week. Originally, I thought there were 2 sessions of this per day, but it's just 1. And it was not brought to us, and it was going to be that way, because originally when we all approved this concept and vision was, I think, at the grand opening at the STEAM Center. is when this originally came to us, was brought to us. But we didn't know that they'd have 15, we couldn't get recess, you guys.
What is the class?
It's a 15-minute class, and it's going to be, actually, I'll defer that to the chief.
So
If he'll have
all of
specifics.
our kids at different times, they've been part of homeroom classes. Homerooms are really your typical K through 6. Homeroom's a spot where the class connects, they do different things. We've all had our kids in those different classes. So we have a strategic plan. We have all kinds of goals that have been approved in that, including careers, setting goals, mindset, wellness. There's a whole bunch of different things that are part of this. So one of the things that we've had conversations about as administration is how is it that when is it that we're going to talk about things like study skills? When are we going to talk about things like careers? When are we going to spend that time? So it's been a dialogue with us. Scranton Middle School, they had a group of teachers that wanted to create an advisory. In different districts, they're called advisories. Sometimes they're called, a seminar. That's what it's typically called at secondary level. So they wanted to have an advisory where initially they were going to do 2 times a week, where it was going to be a chance for the class to connect and do a variety of different topics. All those things I was talking about, goal setting and whatnot. So the brainstorming began in the spring, and they have communicated to parents that they want to do 5 days a week for 15 minutes each day. So Mr. Cowan called me earlier today to talk about that a little bit, and their plan is Friday is grade check. So the students will come in and they will go through and check on grade, missing assignments. Monday, I believe that they were talking about that would be the day for connections. Again, it's 15 minutes, but that would be part of that goal of ours where we want students to be able to feel really connected to their environment, friends, that relationship part, that connection there. Tuesday, Thursday, there are a lot of administrative things that end up taking time away from class. So their thought is that Tuesday, Thursday could be days for those. And then Wednesday would be the day for things like study skills, healthy habits, those other things that are in our strategic plan. So that is what Scranton's looking at doing 15 minutes a day. They shifted from the 2. We're going to have a follow-up conversation on this, but they shifted from the 2 days a week to 5 so that it was a consistent schedule for students. So it wasn't, today's a day where you have to go to home. So every day they would go for that 15-minute stretch of time. So that is what's been proposed. I had requested some additional information on this. I'd like to be able to share specifically what's going to happen. 1, 2, there is an intent from the principals that they would post all lessons publicly and share those with parents so that parents would know exactly what was the topic for that day. That was part of their plan. That's what I know at this point.
So to clarify, this is basically a different version of the classical homeroom,
Correct.
and they're splitting it up into 5 days instead of doing it once a week or, like I said, twice.
So Scranton's in preparation for high school.
Correct.
How's the high school doing theirs?
So they're working on theirs. They don't have it yet, but I don't believe that they're looking at, not looking at the same model as Scranton. I think they're looking at something more like once a month, a little bit different model at the high school, but they're in the brainstorming phases at this point.
So obviously, private schools at this point in time aren't cohesive throughout as to how they want to administer this.
Yeah, it's going to look different. The 4 elementary schools, they're obviously they have homeroom, so they are working to be aligned K4, and I know that 5, 6 is going to work along with them as well. So
And
it's
all
probably,
the elementary schools are going to be the same in what they're doing.
that's the plan.
You know that for sure.
So they have not shared. The only school that is ready at this point, or that was close to ready, is Scranton. The others, it would be a continuation of what they've done in the past, but we're looking at some additional things at the elementary school in the future.
So in preparation of high school for 5 days a week compared to once a month. Doesn't make a lot of sense at this point
That
So-
doesn't concern me so much as it's a different age group and they do things differently with different age groups. Preparation should be in the education part, not the everyday schedule. They change when they go to high school, just like it'll change when they go to college. And it'll change when they go to a career. So I guess my
Yeah, I
question
understand that.
is what I'm trying to understand. Well, you're saying it has to be cohesive throughout in order to prepare them for high school. It's not always gonna look the
Well, wait a
same.
minute, so you're gonna go to elementary school and learn it one way, then you're gonna go to another school and learn it a different way, then you're gonna go to another school and it's gonna be a different way.
Or you could say that's a progression of the same thing.
No, it's not, it's a different idea or a different way.
Homeroom doesn't look the same at every age.
So you'd have the same model
Well, not
for,
every age has
so
homework.
you'd have the same model for every grade K through 12. That was what you would do.
No, I want it to be cohesive, so when one kid leaves one school and he goes into another school, it's not a complete 360-degree turnaround from what he's already learned the first time.
Okay, then tell me what your vision of cohesive means as you progress from K through 12. Tell me what that cohesive, what is it? If you have such criticism of what the administration, what is it?
Did you hear me criticize it?
Yeah.
I didn't criticize them. I said, is it cohesive? Is it going to be cohesive? That's what I asked for. It's just like learning math in one school and turning around and learning it a different way when you've been taught one way.
What is cohesive? I'm asking you a question. You're the one that's saying it should be cohesive. What
Yes,
do you-
exactly.
What do you think how should it be cohesive?
It should follow along from elementary school through high school.
The same. So it should be the exact same, whether you're a kindergartner or a 12th grader. Is
Well,
that-
obviously, there's going to be a difference between a kindergartner and a 12th grader, Roger. I think you're smart enough to understand that, aren't you?
So
Right?
if
There's
I
going to be a difference between those, but why wouldn't the principles be the same and continue all the way through the district?
So if I could, one of the things, obviously this caught me a little off guard today, so I apologize for that. I'd like to gather some more information and be able to present exactly what this looks like to you, so that we can just kind of answer these questions. What you'll see is that there is continuity. While it's 5 days a week, 15 minutes here, and perhaps it's, a half hour, it's different at different levels. It's the same type of thing. It's carving out time for us to be able to do some of the things that are not built into the classes that we have. Some of the things in this that we do not have time in that we need to build in time for. We have it at the elementary, but we don't at middle school or at high school. Some of the things that we have, one of the big ones is working with our students on goal setting and particularly connecting what they're doing today with where they're going in the future. That career pathway is one of the biggest areas that we don't have time. So the idea of carving out some of this time, that's a big piece of it. The homework checks, particularly at at middle school, is one that I think is an excellent use of time, where we check in and make sure that students don't get behind on their grades. I'm really excited about that day. I think that's a really good one. The Wednesday, which is the the habits of the mind, all of those type of things. We've talked about lessons that we want to share. We want it to be helping with parent resources, but we're talking about healthy habits, getting enough sleep. We're talking about leadership, all these different types of things that are in our strategic plan, but we don't have a spot built in. So the idea is that we're carving out some time for it. The middle school is saying we want to do it 15 minutes, 5 days a week. The high school thinks that it might work a little bit differently. Some of this is piloting these things, but I'd like to gather some more information so that we can talk with more certainty about this. I have a lot of faith in Mr. Borg and Mr. Renner, who are part of this. I'd love to have them standing up here answering these questions, because I think that would alleviate a lot of the concerns if they were here. I just apologize that I don't have all the specifics that they have. So what's that? They have about the 5 days, 15 minutes. So yeah, I knew that obviously there was a shift of the timing. So.
So specifically though, when we look at our day in class, as tight as we run class to class, where did we get the 15 minutes at to do this? How did we schedule? What did we take away? Because there's always we have certain number of hours, certain number of minutes in the classroom. What did we lose here? Where did it come from?
So you have 15 minutes, you have 6 hours. So 15 divided by 6.
So per classroom.
Correct.
So over the span of the 6 hours, we took out the 15 minutes.
Correct. Actually, I'm gonna back up on that. That's actually incorrect. I believe that there's also 1 minute less in passing
Okay.
between your hours as well. So that's 5 of it, and then you have 6. So you lost, a minute or 2 of each class.
Okay. So right now in the middle school level, what is a class time frame? What is our class block? What's it look like?
All right. Let me see if I have a picture of my daughter's schedule, who's is a middle schooler here.
If I understand it, what is the average class in there? Regular
Yeah.
hour class?
So-
20 minutes?
So first hour is 7:55 until 8:51, for example. So just under an hour, so 56 minutes.
So the 15 minutes, instead of taking one full day, they split it into 5 days, which puts us pretty close to that. So it's like having one class spread out over 5 days.
No, because that's 3 minutes then, 15.
That's
So
what
that would be 3 minutes.
The passing time last year was more than this
I'm
year.
talking about the actual
So-
15 minutes for that class. So homeroom would normally be a full class, 1 day a week. Now we split it into 5
Is
days.
that what your kids were doing?
That's what my take on it is. I don't know, I haven't seen, I'm picking the schedule up tomorrow.
What did they do prior when you guys were at Scranton though? Did you guys have a 1 hour homeroom during the
There
week?
was always a homeroom. There's been a homeroom for a while.
I know that when I was in Grosse Pointe before, the middle schools, it's pretty typical to have some sort of homeroom during the course of a week. I know that,
That's typically the teacher that you have as a contact with your student in there, because it's the homeroom, and they kind of have a knowledge of what's going on and what the schedules are. So he's always had a homeroom class,
Yeah.
as long as I can remember.
when I was in Novi had seminar. When I was in Grosse Pointe, they had an advisory. When I was in Brandon, they had an advisory. So that's,
Like 1 day a week or once a month?
yeah, it varies by spot. In Novi, it was twice a week, but for longer, it was an hour long, twice a week.
Do we have an obligation regarding our teaching as far as how many minutes the students have to be in each class, or is that determined here at the board level? Is there a state requirement?
Yes, there are requirements from the state. There's 1,098 minutes or hours for the course of the year. And then, we've decided to be 6 hours, and we have equal hours. So
You have to equal that no matter, that's including class changing, but the minutes in the classroom are calculated.
correct.
And obviously this form fits that. We're not going to go outside of what's required.
Correct. We're in full compliance doing this.
Okay, so if we can answer this parent's question, is there an opt-out form if they don't want to partake in this?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why we would not allow for that.
All right. So that could be allowed then.
Sure.
All right. What about this concern about unsolicited mental health care that we don't want, or she doesn't want?
So let me get you the specifics on this, but mental health care, I think we're talking, the topics that I'm talking about with wellness are big picture items that we're also going to be working on with parents. These are proactive, these are mindset. So if we go to our third section of our strategic plan, when we look at the culture for success for students, we're talking about the environment for success, which includes relationships, it includes wellness, and it includes involvement. And the second part of that includes, it's specific to mindset. And that has to do with students setting goals that are meaningful for themselves and connected to their futures. And the second part of it are specific lessons that will help our students to set high expectations for what is possible from themselves, and also to help find their own career pathways. So that's what we're talking about. It's
It sounds
in our
like
strategic plan.
And again,
100%, right.
Again, the question goes back, and this is, again, what we're here to do. Who's going to monitor this on an ongoing basis when it comes to changing of personnel, the next guard changes, the next principal changes, the next, that's the concern that I have. And again, I can see this being, some of this being pretty beneficial, but she wasn't wrong when she asked about who's going to be giving advice to the students without their parents there. So who's monitoring and who's going to be validating that this meets the code of our district? And Because we've had some people come through our system in my time here and before when I was a student here that were not people we would put in positions to do this. I can give you the names if you want, but it's not necessary. And so that was my concern. So when this was brought to me, I thought, and this was today, I thought it was pretty important. So this idea of the specifics of the syllabus and curriculum, we're going to publish it. So the parents will know what's being taught in these extra classes. And if it's about, I'm all about careers and getting them motivated at the early time. And so they get an idea 2 years later what they might want to do because we can prep now. I'm 100% on board. And the other thing is, and this is something that maybe certain sessions that aren't with our certified teaching staff could be recorded. They'd be recorded for management's observations to take care of them. This is just an idea. And because they're not certified staff, as far as teaching staff, some of the people that may be working with our students, they could be our employees, but they're not our teachers. Just an idea.
Is that the case? Because typically your homeroom teacher is a teacher.
That's different. There's people that'll be working with the students that aren't teachers.
But that's not what the plan is. I mean,
It's part of the plan.
these are the homeroom, for the homeroom, that will be one of the teachers. It's part of their schedule, right? I mean,
Yes.
Yes. So my daughter's third hour teacher will be her advisory teacher. But Mr. Conley, I think your part about the transparency, I think is a really important piece. So who is it that monitors this? One is, it's 15 minutes. It is a set lesson that's to be done across the building. And there's a commitment that those will be published and shared with parents. So parents will know what those lessons are. And that I think is a really important piece to it. That's one way. Obviously the transparency is a piece. Some of these lessons, as I understand it, are going to be ones where the principal may be speaking. It might be watching a part of a video where the principal talks about an event coming up, or, okay, we're coming up to the end of the quarter, and it's a person that's going to have a video and talking about a skill set. Those are things that we could share with parents as well. So honestly, we want to be transparent in it. We're not trying to do anything, out of the lines here or anything like that. So.
Physical therapy appointment. All right, so, but people other than teachers are going to be teaching these 15-minute segments. Again.
So are you talking about like if there's an expert in an area?
No, people that we employ will be taking these 15-minute segments on and teaching them without a certified staff being present.
No, these are teachers. So my daughter's third hour teacher would be the person that would carry out the 15-minute task. He would check in with her homework and say, Hannah, I noticed you're missing some assignments or whatever. I think that would be his role as her advisory teacher.
All right. Well, under the conditions that certified staff are the only ones speaking to our students, and that's what I've been told, that's what I expect. And I'll leave it at that. If I find anything else happens, then we'll be back and we'll address it again from the parent network. And again, the way I understand it now, and I've got a couple of texts that it's some of our counseling department is planning on carrying on these 15-minute sections and different things. And it could be career readiness, it could be this and that, but they're not certified staff and they're not teachers. If they are, then maybe I just understand what a counselor is. Some have been retired teachers and became counselors in the old days, but are counselors considered teachers?
They're part of the teaching unit. As you said, some were certified teachers previous, others went straight into counseling. So there's different pathways into that field.
Well, so at this time though, from what we understand, like Ken brought up the homeroom and they'll be teaching. So certified staff will be carrying on these 15-minute sessions.
That's
Classroom to classroom. 5 days a week. Okay, that's, takes care of that issue. Now, is there any regulatory laws that have to be addressed because we're changing a footprint within that school at this level? Is that something just as a board we agree to, or the administration agrees to, and then we support? I mean, that's, so there's no laws that we have to address.
There's no issues legally or with pupil accounting or anything. We're in full compliance with all regulations.
So how are we going to determine if this is working? And the reason I bring that up is there's a lot of students that don't need this. So we're taking those students out of valuable potential class time for them that they could be just rocking and rolling, and we're putting them in an environment that they may not need because they'd have this laid out for them. As you know, I look at all the students, from people that need the extra help, and I always have, to the ones that are AP class bound and ready to go and don't need extra help. But so we feel that we should take all of them and put them in a big bowl and say, we're going to take your schedule and change it. So how are we going to determine that this fits the needs of our entire student population? I can understand some students that were at risk or some that have asked for this extra assistance, but we're going to change this for all of our students.
Well, I guess I would answer by saying, you know, we have a strategic plan that we put in place, and we said these things are a priority, not for some, but for all students.
Okay.
And the reality is that connecting to your careers and connecting to your future pathways and learning how to be my personal best and you to be your personal best and setting
stuff.
goals and healthy habits, I think those are lessons that apply to everyone. So I think it'd be incumbent upon us to make sure that this time is used extremely well. This is a pilot, and if it's too much time, then it needs to be modified. And so I would say that would be administration oversight of that, starting with the building principals and working with the district administration. And obviously, I'd like to bring you all some more information as well.
May I suggest, if this is going to go forward and not have this stuff already organized, and we're going to go through it as a test, an experimental program, which is what it sounds like we're doing, pilot, then we send out within a very short amount of time after it starts, a parent survey to determine the parent's position on this. And that would then solidify the situation or make it, well, it's not working for me because of this. So we get some input from the people who were in charge of looking after their children. And I think, like I said, I'm right on the edge of supporting or not supporting. And I obviously support anything that helps them make decisions about healthy living and taking care of themselves. I mean, that's not an issue. But some folks and some kids come in ready to go in those areas. And hopefully within this structure, they'll be able to also learn. And the ones who need the extra help in those areas will be able to determine that. I know that's the idea, to not let anybody fall through the cracks. But could we do that? Do a parent survey?
Sure, we definitely get feedback from parents on this as well. I think
Maybe
getting some feedback from students, I think, would be really important as well, just to feel like that they're finding value in it as well. And
I think that's the expectation for the strategic plan anyways, is to stay in touch with our students and our parents as we go through the changes that we're implementing to see what's been effective over the short term and the long term. Because I think that long-term impact of something like this might be more important than the immediate feedback that we get from just the first few weeks of it.
Except we didn't know that it was 5 days. We thought it was 2. And we don't have a curriculum or content for any of the classes yet.
so let me get that to you. And I'm going to have a meeting tomorrow at Scranton about this. And what I'd like to see is a follow-up communication to all the middle school parents, just to maybe even frame out what it's going to look like for the entire month of September. You know, as a parent, I'd love to see it. Then on the 23rd, this is what's going to happen. And then we can go from there. I think that might alleviate some of the concerns on it. And
Does
then
it start
again,
right away, Dr. Ola? Does it start the day of school starts? Or is
it does.
Okay.
It does. It's going to start right away. So we'll get a communication out quickly. Obviously, I'm going to get you all more information as well. But I'll work with them tomorrow to do a follow-up with all Scranton parents with a little bit more information on this.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can proceed forward with the.
The HR report would be wonderful if you're willing.
That would help. Happy.
So we have a HR report presented for your review. We have 7 teachers here. At place here, we added 2 since this was published on Thursday with meetings on Friday and today. And so the request is to approve the human resource report as presented.
Do we have a motion? Supervisor Stahl, supported by Dr. Krebs. Any discussion? Schuyler.
Yes. During the hiring process of these teachers, who interviewed them for becoming employees?
The interview process consists of the principal, teachers formed a committee member, and then the principal and myself discussed the final candidates.
Were there any board members involved?
There were not.
Were there any outside parents or anybody besides our own employees involved in
No.
hiring them? Okay.
And you weren't part of the interview?
Yes, I've been part of most of these, yes, especially the last part where I talked with the candidates and the principals talk about their recommendations.
And, I was just going to say that we have made that modification heading forward based on feedback from the Board of Education. We're going to have a parent rep as part of our hiring process in the future. That's been added to our our hiring manual. So that's been added.
And so in response to that would be who picks the parent rep?
That would be the principal.
So what's the difference? So so in this situation, and I've been asking, and I know that it's up to the board to, if we want to change things like this. So it's up to me to, get to Roger and have a discussion and so on about if we're going to put someone assigned to it or rotate board personnel or however, or if we change it at all or not at all. And I haven't done that. So, but I've asked a few times, and I had hoped it would just happen by itself, that we would adopt a strategy that seemed more transparent in this process. Our own employees, hiring our own employees in a public institution, I feel doesn't have the transparency necessary to do this job. And that's just my opinion. The board hasn't thought that or said that or never, like I said, haven't brought it to the board for that concern yet, just other than discussion. So tonight, not reflecting at all on the level of candidate here. In the old days, we used to get the resumes for the teachers that we were hiring, and we would review their resumes, their credentials, and the board had some oversight of that. Usually it was at the final stages. It wasn't in the beginning necessarily, but it was at the final stages. And I think you would recall that, Bill?
Yep.
Okay.
And you were able to ask questions as well about.
You could ask virtually anything you wanted to ask. And as an elected official that was brought here to keep an eye on that kind of stuff and help with that and to bring, we've hired some very good teachers, and it's obvious in the past back then and currently the ones we're looking at today. So I don't want my vote of no being any reflection on the quality of these teachers. But I'm going to vote no on this. Now, the point being, though, that I didn't know this was even on an agenda because I never got one. I didn't even know we were voting on this. I thought this was a policy committee meeting, not that we would be voting on hiring a bunch of very very important people to our district. So I'm having a little issue with that still tonight. And so that meant that I wouldn't have been here to vote on this or vote no on this, but that there would have been a quorum of 4 that would have voted yes for it. I have a true issue with this, that issue, all on its own merit. But we'll take that up another night. So that's what I have to say about this. So when I vote no on this, it has no bearing on the qualifications. And I know our superintendent, Mr. Scaling, are looking at highly qualified professional staff at the end of this run. There's no issue with that.
Can I ask one quick follow-up question? We can add resumes, no problem.
Or any board member at any point in time can ask for
Yeah.
it to look at the resumes. I mean, it's not a secret.
Why aren't they just given to us?
We didn't
Because
know.
we switched that
When did we
like about
switch?
2 years ago.
When did we switch?
We switched when we started doing, we had a full, hold on, we had a full board discussion about, do we want to go with the human resources report in lieu of having the packet of each individual? And we unanimously said that we would agree to go forward with the human resources report. That's what we agreed to shortly after Mr. Scaling was hired. That was the direction that the board unanimously agreed to
I
proceed
recall
forward.
that. I do. In support that we
And
did.
so, but having said that, notwithstanding a human resources report, if any board member wants to see a resume or ask any other questions about any of these candidates, you can call Mr. Scaling, you can call Dr. Outlaw. I mean, it's certainly readily accessible information. I will say this about the prospect of a board member being involved in the interview process. Well, I think it's an Open Meetings Act violation because the University of Michigan got sued and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. It was Booth Newspapers versus University of Michigan Board of Regents, because they appointed a single board member to screen the applicants for their president hire and narrow it down to a smaller group that then would be reviewed by the entire board. And they said that even though it was one board member, because they were delegated that authority to narrow the candidates, that was in effect delegating the board's legal authority, and they couldn't do that. So I think that would be a problem legally. We could certainly, well, to narrow the candidates to a single recommendation would be a problem.
You're just asking to sit in.
And just, I'm finally U of M lost on something, and they probably deserve to lose on that one.
But I'm just saying, if the intent is to have a board member sit in and be part of the recommendation to bring forward whoever the list of candidates are on the human resources report, I believe that would be an Open Meetings Act violation because of the University of Michigan case.
It's possible, but we'd have to look into that and talk to Truon about it. I would suggest that that's possible. But the idea, though, is having no knowledge today of any of the candidates we hired, and there was no opportunity really to look at these. We didn't know, what was it? It was Tuesday you sent these out?
Thursday, I think.
Thursday.
Yeah, last week.
Thursday. Yeah, and then an amended one came out today. Okay, it doesn't fit the ability to get and look at it if you wanted to. But the point being, in my opinion, I think as an observer, I'm not saying to have any governmental authority or you appoint someone to select these candidates, but to be part of the process, to bring back information to the board and a resume if you wanted to, and say, hey, this would be really great. This is something that we should really look at or something. I just think it could be there. And again, maybe like you said, Roger, I recall that 2 years ago. I remember that was brought up, in all fairness, to be concerned here. And as while you want to play the, in devil's advocate or whatever, you want to change the playing field, well, then you bring it to the board and you want to change it, you have to go through the process. But in this case, I've just asked for some kind of input from the community besides our hired staff. I didn't say, and I said it could be one of us, it could be community people, it could be even the PTO moms rotate. It doesn't matter, but there's been really none to date.
To that, what you just said about the teacher, I mean, it makes sense because they're already in the buildings that's who they're going to. Because otherwise you'd have to put out a letter saying on this date, we're looking for someone, it would be a whole process. So I guess you have to decide what you want then.
I'm not putting a number on it or a title to it, just thinking out loud of a roundabout way that we could come up with a method. But I think that an elected person in the capacity of knowing what's going on in here, should they want to, like I said, this board may decide, no, just let them keep doing this as they're doing. But I think it should be optional. And we should be informed when the interviews are. And all those things should we want to drop in. And I don't believe we should have authority to say hire or don't hire. That's not what we do. They do. And then we approve it once they decide.
One other thing is, it's been said now at least 3 times that we didn't know about this happening tonight, or it wasn't spread out. So how did I know about it? Did we discuss it at the last meeting that you were gonna bring this forward because you needed to get it done, or how did we all know about it?
Yes, we talked about it, and we talked about those previous policy committee meetings, and it was discussed at one of those, if we were able to bring this specific thing
So that's-
forward. That's where it came
But
from.
I wouldn't,
Time-sensitive thing.
Right, so the
That's
members
smarter
present
worded, but
were
I
there.
wanted to make-
but I wouldn't have known because I wasn't here.
Right.
So, and I'm just as elected official as you are, and we're all the same.
No, and I agree. I just, well, in the future, if we change it, maybe we need to get an email out to each one of us to ensure everybody's on board and understands.
I got an email that there'd be something going on.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
so that was, I got an email, but no, like I said, no agenda. So I think I've got it covered. So thank you for the time.
All right, any further discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Any nays? That passes 5-2. All right, so that moves us into the continuation of the policy review. We left off with 3118 was where we were going to start. So.
Yes, I think we left off
3118.
3118. I think we left off the discussion of, we had just finished additional appeal grounds. And the appeals process, which we were discussing in comparison to what our current Title IX policy is. I believe that's where the discussion left off on 3118.
And Mr. Scaling, in your review of this section, did it have substantive differences between what we currently provide as our Title IX grievance process and what is laid out here in Troon's model policy?
Yes, we had chosen to, the board had chosen to do a appeal to a panel. So this specific here identifies an appeals officer, which obviously would have to have gone through the training, and it must be someone different than the other roles that Title IX regulations require. So that is different. So I guess the choice would be if we want to stay with the appeal to a panel of board members, then we would need to draft this particular part to reflect that desire.
And what section is that?
This is the section,
F60.
yeah, thank you.
There
Yep.
we go.
Yep, 60.
Did you have an opportunity to talk with Troon about whether they have any concerns with us continuing that practice that we'd adopted previously as part of our Neola package?
No, not specifically related to Title IX, no.
I think I would appreciate it if you could have that conversation before this package comes before the board for a vote. I know that we vetted that with legal counsel at the time that the board adopted it, and it wasn't that long ago, so I don't suspect that there's anything changed, but it would be helpful to know if Troon has any concerns.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have that note.
Any other questions or comments regarding the optional language in 3118? All right, so subject to that feedback from Troon, and we'll revisit the final landing on that recommended alternative. So then 3119.
I think the next three are all optional. We had talked about tabling those until another time. That
Yes,
was
that's correct.
3119, 3120, and 3202. Are we okay skipping?
Yeah, I
all?
think, so the idea, just for your benefit, Mr. Conley, Mr. Trombley, is when we started this process 2 meetings ago, there are several of these policies that we have to adopt that has alternative language. There are others that are optional, that aren't either required by law or, and so for the sake of completing the initial process of the migration from the Neola policies to the Troon policies, we wanted to focus on all of the policies that we need to adopt now. The ones that are, and there's optional language within some of those policies that we have to adopt, and so our focus is discussing which of the optional language provisions within those policies that we have to adopt is going to be our focal point. Then we
They're all
can come
legal,
back.
but whatever you pick is going to be legal vetted by Truon, right?
Correct, of course. This entire package is Troon's package.
Right.
But some of these are just truly optional policies that aren't required by law or, and so for the sake of efficiency, we wanted to get through our base set of policies and adopt those as a board so that we can make that switch. Then the subset that are just truly optional policies, we can come back and revisit them and say, yay, nay, we can identify which ones as a board we want to adopt to add to the core set of Troon policies.
When will that be addressed?
I mean, it'll be after we get through the adoption of the base, set of policies. And we can pick a timeline. I mean, that's not, once we complete that process, but.
Well, these look similar to what we have in Neola, this way this reads, like on this.
I mean, as we've gone through them, there are some that are very similar. There are some that are, they're similar policies, but they have different optional suggestions within, and that's what we're going through with each of these in this initial round. And then there are some like these optional policies that we don't have, that were part of the Troon package that we don't have. And so to kind of help in the review, so on the left-hand column, you see on the left-hand column where there's the reference to 20, like say there's 3118, okay, or 3119, the optional policy. Like below that, there is a reference to another policy that is a reference to the Neola policies. But say you go back to go a couple pages earlier on page, go page 3. Where there's 2305, like you see where 2305, the Troon policy, and right below that you see a 144.1. So the 144.1 is our current Neola policy that addresses the same topic. So that way you can cross-reference what the Troon number is, the 2305, with what the Neola number is that addresses that same topic. Okay.
So like tonight, though, we don't want to talk about this experimental pilot programs. We're going to let that go.
Right.
Because obviously that's still an important thing for
Right.
teachers to be able to bring in, or administration, or us as a board.
Yep, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. So we'll go back to it. It's not like it's going to be eliminated.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
$3204, correct?
Yes.
Yep, okay. So our current policy allows for the superintendent or assistant superintendent of finance to make these investments. So based on our current practice, the recommendation there was to continue with that and add the superintendent or superintendent to the language there on the top of 3204.
This is kind of tied to also the earlier policy where the treasurer is not necessarily a board member, right? I mean, that's kind of reminiscent of that. So since we didn't adopt all of that policy, it wouldn't make sense for us to adopt that.
Any questions, comments?
Does he want that tight? Does he want to be able to do that? You want that responsibility?
So it's,
It's already being done.
yeah, this is just practice. This is how work gets done. It's really the business person being able to do this.
Okay. So, and then,
It matches our current language,
okay,
which matches our current practice.
which is what we're doing now.
Correct.
And
So-
make investments. Superintendent or assistant to finance to make investments. So specifically, what investments are we making?
So
Public money.
if you look up here, here's the actual language. As treasurer designee, will invest district funds, including the district's debt retirement funds. So it's all your bond. It's all the stuff that Mike Engelter does.
This isn't investments for interest.
We're not investing in the stock market or something.
Well, I'm good. You
It's,
don't have to go into it.
Yeah.
That's fine. So this is what we've been doing. And
Yeah.
We're going to continue to do the same.
correct.
That's fine. Thank you.
I've got one other question.
Oh, sure.
So with the authority granted to the business office, then how exactly would that first paragraph read? What are we going to propose there?
We would add superintendent or assistant superintendent of finance.
So is it going to say, if authorized by board resolution, the treasurer or the assistant superintendent of finance? Is that what we're,
Yeah, and that's in that organizational meeting in January. That's one of those do every year.
Okay.
Right.
but we would keep in the designation for the treasurer, so the treasurer would have that authority as well?
I think that's what Truman
Correct.
is recommending. Any concerns? Okay. Are we okay moving forward? Okay.
3205, identify the maximum petty cash fund amount permitted and the custodian of the petty cash funds. In meeting with Mr. Ingolder, so add the value of 500 and then basically add the people who would be in charge of that at each of the locations. Would be the principals, athletic director, superintendent, and the director of accounting. That would be a person listed at each building that would be responsible. for petty
Do we
cash.
list them by name or do we list them by title, by role? So
It
that,
would be by title. That way we don't have to change it every time. Yes. So the person can change, but the responsibility stays with that particular title.
And I'm assuming the petty cash is if something comes out, something goes in for that amount of money and then it's paid back.
Right. Then there's a record keeping piece that the business office has.
Then what happens if it's short at the end of the year or the day, or when's it accounted for?
Mr. Engelar has a process to rectify all of that particular piece. I can't speak because I don't know those specific
It
procedures.
really is, I understand Horning with $500, but is the high school really for $500?
As far as petty cash?
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't change the startup money that they would need for like the athletic
Well,
events, but in
But my
petty
point
cash.
being is there's a big difference between 2,000 students and
Yeah.
how many in an elementary school.
Right, but I think the value, the amount of petty cash shouldn't necessarily need to change, it's not
Then
used.
why do we need 500 there?
That was Mr. Engel's recommendation.
What
Just
is
as,
it
just the
now?
value that was enough to do business, but not enough to,
You know what it is now? Do they have petty cash boxes now?
I'd make an assumption since it's his recommendation, that's probably 500.
So they now have 500?
I don't know that they have that, but this policy allows up to, like, for example, allows me to do it. My petty cash is 0, and it's always going to be 0 because I don't want petty cash.
But it's at the discretion of the finance director as to who gets the petty cash? Is that the idea?
it would be these people and the discretion, yes.
And we do, Mr. Trombley, you asked about reconciliation. At a minimum, this policy in B6 requires an annual reconciliation. At a minimum, which isn't to say that the finance director shouldn't be doing that more often, but at a minimum, that's where it would be. And I would expect that if the petty cash under the control of a particular principal or someone else comes up short and doesn't match the reconciliation at the end of the year, that would be a significant part of the evaluation for that person and our decision to retain them. That's what I would hope the administration
Yeah, but we never know
considers.
that. Or who would ever know that?
Mr. England?
Yeah.
Mr. Engelsberg, yes.
Yeah, but he's not part of the evaluation, is he?
I see where you're going with that.
That's fair, but I mean, we only have an administration of how many people on your staff, Dr. Outlaw? I mean, I would expect that if we have a principal that's shorting the petty cash, that Dr. Outlaw is going to hear about that.
Well, that, and then remember, we get a forensic audit every year.
Well, but again, that would be at the end of the year. And again, if it doesn't get related to him, you would never know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that we need to have that covered in policy rather than in administrative procedures, though? I mean, do you want
Well,
to see something here?
Maybe reconcile more than, and again, I guess it would be up to the finance director as to how often he'd like to reconcile it, but maybe reconcile it more than once at the end of the year.
We certainly, as the board, can create a policy that requires more than that. I mean, this sets a minimum standard for a year, but if we feel more comfortable with quarterly reconciliations, we
I
can draft
think
it that way.
quarterly would be far better than once at the end of the year. I think you would have a better shot of knowing something earlier on if anything was going on or not.
So we scroll up to 5.
Oh.
So there's a monthly review. Okay, I mean, the reconciliation is annual, but there's a monthly review of the expenditure. So there's a monthly, under this policy, check and balance.
And that would be conducted by the,
Well, it's technically supposed to be by the treasurer, you know.
right, by the finance director.
Well, but 5 says the superintendent or designee, right? And then requires the discrepancies to be reported to the board.
Okay, so Michael looks at these monthly then, the way I'm reading.
Well, I don't know if he does it now, I don't know if he looks at it now monthly, but under this policy,
He'll do it.
this,
But the accountant, Elizabeth Patterson, does. She reconciles, she counts the beans, make sure all the money in, money out. And then at the end of the year, we have the external audit that you all will get, in this fall, that they go through all of this, including petty cash. So
But again, I don't think she's over at the elementary schools going through the cash box, looking at the receipts and then going back, counting money, right? She's just taking the information that's given to her,
sure.
I'm assuming.
I'll bet they could have 250. It's just the idea, this is a maximum, or a couple $100. If they want $100 in their petty cash, they have money in the box. So I don't think that's an issue, but I have a question on this. Don't you think? I mean, if I was the receptionist or running the place, I'd just have $100 petty cash and call it good.
Yeah.
Just to make small change if somebody needs it. But anyhow, in this, is this the same area that who oversees the income from our sporting events and the cash, and who counts it all and who deposits it all? Is it a different area?
That would be a different area.
Okay, that's an area that I have some thoughts on. Okay, have we already gone through that already, or are we gonna get to that at some point?
I don't think that's actually, I don't recall reading that specific procedure in the policy as far as the extracurricular accounting piece.
You bring in tens of thousands of dollars a year in gate receipts. So I'd like to have someone in a policy and a hierarchy somehow to organize how that's handled. I think it's gone on for years without problems and all that, but I think as we're doing this, tightening up policies, I've thought about it on many occasions. How are we handling all that intake in cash? And who's handling it, who's counting it, who's depositing it? And obviously, our superintendent of finance does the accounting when it's deposited, but who's watching the flow chart and where that money's coming from and where it's going? I've never seen a report on it. I've only seen it in totality. So maybe at some point, maybe I could ask for that even tonight. We'll just send it through to Mike, and maybe for last year, I'd like to see a report broken down of where the big cash resources come from, be it football games, be it whatever it is. And then we can decide more if we see what kind of dollars we're talking about. Because I expect it's, over $100,000, I would think.
I remember we had this conversation a while back in regards to the way tickets were sold, and the way tickets were numbered. And at that time, we were told it was, you take the first ticket number and you write it down, and then you look at the last ticket number, and then supposedly you go through and you count the money, and they should balance. They should balance. But there's more than one occasion that you've seen people walk in, you've seen people go through, you've seen people not take tickets, you've seen people take money, put it in their pockets. Believe me, I don't think the system works very well, so.
Well, today's time with electronics, it'd be
Yes,
pretty easy.
I think we could be far more sophisticated
We should
than
be.
what we are.
We should be. And that's not saying anybody's doing anything wrong either.
No.
But in a way to advance our program.
Yeah.
To get to a point, if it's, in an industry, we are responsible for every invoice, every number. We have to be able to pull it up for record in X number of years. And and that's just an audit situation. That's a normal audit. So in this situation, I would like to have some control and audit potential for people that are responsible to take care of this money for us, that they would be subject to audit. And
I mean, obviously, that's not, in this particular.
it's not in here anywhere, Roger.
But no, but in terms of the process, and if there's a policy that you want to bring back as an optional policy, that's perfectly fine. Right, that's,
Yep.
So we've got the note.
I'm trying to.
Got that note down, we'll do
That's what I
that.
appreciate.
Thank you, Mr.
But then we can make a note and maybe we could expand on it.
Any other concerns on 3205 or questions?
I just want to make sure I understand what it is we're going to bring to the board table. So we had a conversation about adding quarterly reconciliations before we started talking about the monthly reviews. Do we, as a board, still have consensus that we want to move to a quarterly reconciliation, or is the monthly review and reporting that's in B5 sufficient with an annual official reconciliation? I would support a quarterly reconciliation, so,
Okay.
but that's
Right
just
now,
me.
We don't know what the monthly, I guess the monthly, what that consists of.
Right, well, based on the policy, the monthly is only if there's a significant discrepancy, so we won't hear anything.
Well, we wouldn't, but it does say that the superintendent or designee will review petty cash fund expenditures with the treasurer at least monthly. So there's got to be some review that's
But again, I'm
conducted to
assuming
support
that's just
that.
a report from each school as to what that is. I don't think that's,
I would not expect that to be as formal as a reconciliation. So that's why I wanted to bring it back up and see if
Correct.
we wanted this policy to read that a formal reconciliation needs to take place quarterly, or can that remain an annual requirement? Which isn't to say that the director of finance might not choose to do it more often, but at a policy level, do we want to require more often?
Can I ask a question? Can we ask Dr. Anglefair the question of how do you do it exactly? And has there ever been a discrepancy that you thought was needed to be brought to the board? And if he was to find one, would he bring it to us before the end of the year? Because I see a lot of manpower going into something like this for a guy that's watching all the rest of the books. I'm not saying it couldn't be done by one of his people or something, but it looks to me like it's basically a quick review. Do you have receipts? I can imagine that conversation goes like it does at work. What's the number on your receipts? What do you got left in your tray? Sounds like you're good. We'll review it again next month, that kind of thing. If that's being done, he's got a pretty good head, because I don't think do they continuously revolve and replenish the $500? I don't know, or do they call and say, hey, I'm down to $100, I might need some more, and then they do it? I'd like to know what his procedure is, and maybe it's not even necessary. It might be covered.
How often is it actually used?
Exactly.
I mean, if
That
it's
might
on a
sit there
limited
for a long time,
basis,
too.
there may not be a reason to.
I mean, I think every principal has a card also, don't they? Yeah.
I think Troon wrote this in a way that probably matches with,
Yeah.
typical policy or practice. You've got a monthly, that's what, like I said, the accountant, this is what they do. They reconcile everything. That's what they do like every day. And so whatever the board wants on this one, but it's, adding the extra steps, obviously, just means more time pulled for a pretty small pot, but whatever you all want.
So I guess the issue is, do you want to go with the language as proposed by Drone, or do you want to add quarterly as a reconciliation?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't, anybody else? I mean,
I agree.
okay.
So quarterly it is.
Okay.
So at 3209,
Yes, 3209. Debit credit cards here. Identify whether the board may issue board officers credit cards. Current policy does not include board officers for credit cards. So the recommendation based on our current practice is not adopt board officer language in option 1.
I agree with the recommendation from the administration. I can't see any reason for any of us to have a card attached to district dollars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I go back and ask you a question about 3208? And again, because I don't know, but is that where board members are bonded?
I believe, I mean, that's not one of the ones we were.
No, I know, but I'm just asking that because is that where you have bonded board members? Is that what that's for?
I think so. I mean, I don't, because it's not, in the slip. I don't have that policy right in front of me.
That is what it is, but it's wholly optional, so we don't,
Right.
we've slated that one to walk through later, but yeah.
No, I understand that, but is that for if we were to be bonded as a board member? That's what that policy is.
That's what I read it to
And I'm
say, yeah.
assuming that we're not bonded, so that wouldn't apply to us.
Yeah, we don't have that policy today.
Okay.
That's an excellent question. So that's 3208. So currently, we don't have bonds for us board members.
Because we don't handle the we don't handle the money.
Okay.
These are surety bonds for, so if the treasurer actually had the checkbook and was dispensing the funds, then there would be a need for, I mean, this is all about financial, financial management. So none of us actually physically have control.
Liability bond. This is more for handling, okay.
Yeah, we get that form, if you're named treasurer, you sign off realizing that you're not gonna actually touch the money, that's what we do at that first
But
meeting.
again, this is financial, this is liability.
Okay. It's a financial liability, not a liability.
Right.
I got that. Just
Okay.
checking. Yeah, thanks, Bill.
So are we all in agreement that the board doesn't need, no board member needs to have a district issued credit card?
I can share one thing. If you turn your bills in late, you won't get reimbursed. If you turn in your bills and you haven't got approval before you turn them in, you won't get reimbursed. So you might as well just skip the credit cards altogether because you probably won't get reimbursed even if you had wrote it on the credit card. So let's just skip them all together. Personally, I had thousands of dollars I turned in. Some was like 6 months and a year, and all the money we were doing the STEAM Center work, or actually auto program. I think you remember that. And I think our bookkeeper said, excuse me, how long are these bills? So I would just suggest that we just do it like normal, get it approved ahead of time if we have an expense. So no credit cards necessary.
Okay.
I would like to get the write-off though at some point. So if I turn that into the board could approve that maybe. That'd be appreciated.
All right, 3212.
3212, identify the district administrator responsible for providing required continuing disclosure information in the second paragraph. So the recommendation there is to adopt that optional language in the paragraph there.
So it's basically saying that if there was some sort of exigent circumstance where it would be prudent to not follow a particular policy that with the advice of, and it's in the context of bonds, that with the direction of bond legal counsel, that it just gives the district the flexibility to do that, right?
That's exactly how Mr. Engel
It's kind of a catch-all.
explained it to me.
And that's different than we have now?
This just provides that optional language. I'm not, I could go back and look. I'm not sure if we have that specific language in 6146. But this policy gives us the option to do it if we need to.
But without that, you'd have to come before the board
You have to change the policy.
either way. Okay.
So Trina's recommendation is to adopt it.
I don't think this is just about policy matters, though. It looks to be about any matter that the district would be required to report to the folks that bought the bonds under the SEC's regulations. So a factual matter that doesn't have anything to do with policies we've adopted could fall under that continuing disclosure obligation, depending on how the bond itself is written.
Right, but I think it still goes back to the policy requires a certain disclosure, and that it would be an unreasonable burden. This policy would give the district the opportunity to confer with bond counsel
Okay.
to see if it's necessary under that. That's how I interpret it.
Okay.
And bond counsel may say, no, you have to, you got to report it, or you have to, whatever the policy issue that's question. That's how I interpret it.
Okay.
Thirty, 3213.
We're going to adopt it then. We're good.
Is everyone okay with that?
We were verifying the district administrator responsible for certain financial transactions in this particular policy. Recommendation is to add assistant superintendent of finance and the director of accounting in 1 and 2. What is there?
So do we have a director of accounting
Yes.
Yes.
as
So-
a job title?
And this is generally consistent with the process that we currently have in place with our existing policy for internal auditing and who is involved in that process?
That's my understanding, yes. Yep.
But we're not actually keeping written approvals, are we? We're obtaining electronic approvals based on the software that our originating bank has
Yes.
supplied us.
Yeah.
I don't recall, did the definitions for this policy package allow electronic documents to be considered the equivalent of written documents? Because if not, we may want to revise that policy section, because it looks like if written means written, then you would need to keep paper copies of those.
So it's suggest that
Dr. Outlaw, can you scroll up?
It's not in that policy section, and I'm not finding it in the definitions section, but I'm only able to search folder by folder here, so I can't get everything.
Dr. Hamilton just do one of these recently. I remember him reporting to us that there was some type of a change in one of our, and I'm trying to remember, it's been probably 5 months. That's about the extent of my memory. But there was something to do with redoing a couple of the bonds. And I guess my further question is he already the person doing this and we just don't have it written? Because who is our director of accounting?
Elizabeth Patterson. Yeah, every district has, has an executive finance person, and then you always have a accountant, even in a small district like Brandon, where I was at. You have an accountant, that's where your checks and balances come from. And there's a division of duties so that you always have that checks and balances that's required by your auditors and whatnot.
So do you need an answer to?
I do, yeah, I think it would be important for us to know whether,
Is that in paper or if it's?
right, or if there's some other section of the policy policy package that I haven't found yet that allows the district to keep electronic records in any place where the policy refers to written records.
And so if there isn't, then the suggestion would be that we add a definition in this particular policy that makes that equate to
Yes.
the electronic record.
Yes. Because I suspect that at this point in time, most businesses are only keeping electronic records of those financial decisions. And they have built-in controls within those electronic systems to ensure that you have two signers to approve the outgoing ACH, two signers to approve the placement of the incoming funds. So that I would expect to be a normal business practice, but I don't think that this policy on its face reflects that yet. So some confirmation from Ms. Lur.
So Mr. Scaling just pointed out the last this document can contain electronic general ledger. So it's there, I think.
Yeah,
Is that
but
it?
I don't like how it says written in so many places, especially in a policy section that specifically refers to electronic transactions. So you've made a distinction between electronic and other things in the body of that policy. To me, it's ambiguous whether that last sentence is enough. So if our electronic general ledger software is sufficient, then section C1 should be updated.
I've been around you guys long enough. I think if that said must be instead of can be, that would answer your question, right?
I don't know that
Or
you want to,
shall be.
I don't know that you want to do that though, Mr. Stahl.
But that would tell you it's there.
It would.
Well, then maybe the suggestion is we add some modifying language. This was to eliminate the ambiguity.
That's exactly what I would like to see, yeah. Assuming that Mr. Ingleter is not actually keeping paper records here.
So maybe ask Mr. Ingleter
Mhm.
to add some clarification language to make that clear that would, the electronic records would satisfy that requirement.
Either down there at the bottom or maybe better situated in C1.
So how do we do that, by the way? So you find out, yes, it is electronic, you'll go ahead and put it through and then just report to us it wasn't indeed electronic, or how do we find it? Or will we review this again?
I will, in this particular case, if it requires modified language, then I'll add it into that folder. It'll be in red. All of the things that we've talked about to add, I'll add them. You know, the selections will be in red. Any additional language will be in red. All of that, so you can see exactly how all of the things that we've.
So we'll have another meeting to go through.
Yeah,
But
you
go
guys would
through
plan
it.
on going
Just
through
make
all.
sure that we covered all the
Right.
bases.
Yeah.
I'm
Well, and
taking
we-
good notes, but we want to make sure that
Yeah.
we got it as it's intended, yes.
And we still have to go through it again to vote on it, Ken, so.
Yeah.
It's not like
Yeah,
this is
we
the
would
last time you
rewrite-
see it.
Reread it type thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. 3301, purchasing and procurement. Optional language excludes complying with competitive bidding in an emergency.
Excludes or includes?
I'm sorry.
Excludes. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that optional language would be
That was the recommendation.
valuable.
Is to adopt that optional language.
What's the amount though, an emergency, a boiler, $500,000?
But do we have a definition of an emergency?
Well, it says if competitive bidding is not required, so and your $500,000 would be
That's-
required,
Yeah, over 25,000, right?
I believe so.
What are we going to consider an emergency though? I know we've spent time on some of these other ones really looking at definitions. And an emergency seems very vague.
Well, it could be, something happened to our electrical system that has to be fixed, there's no time to get us together.
I understand that.
Yeah, but yeah,
I understand that. That's an easy case. It's the other, I mean, I feel like that needs a little more clarification.
Definition.
Well, would the definition be just a cap, like a monetary cap of what would be allowed by
I
emergency?
don't think the
or-
dollar amount's the issue, it's the
It's the
word emergency.
timeliness. It's the timeliness. I think the emergency has to do with the timeliness, doesn't it?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
That would make
understand.
sense to me.
Emergency meant school wasn't gonna open, to me, that's an emergency if it's supposed to be open, because school should be open.
Or is it that you have to make the decision and line up the contractor quickly, right? So if an emergency happens, let's say the storm that came through tonight blew the roof off of Spencer Elementary. That's an emergency. We need to get that corrected. We probably need to get somebody in there to put up the tarps right away.
Instead of waiting on insurance money to come in and do it.
But we probably still need to competitively bid that roof because it's not like they're going to put on the roof tomorrow anyways. So
Well, hold on though, they're gonna be here tomorrow though to fix it, to make sure you can have school under the conditions still, and it'll be safe.
If that's possible, right? So I think that's the emergency is where the competitive bidding process would prevent you from dealing with the emergency situation. There's got to be a better way to say that, right? Because it has to be a situation that's an emergency, and the competitive bidding process would prevent you from adequately addressing the emergency. I
Well,
think
then
that's what you're saying,
Why don't
right?
you
Let's do the timing.
let the board define what the emergency situation is, if it's an emergency,
Well, but do you want to have to convene a board meeting to confirm that this is an emergency?
or maybe 4 for a majority.
Well, we'd have to, I mean, to have 4 of us, we have to convene a board meeting, so we have to notice that, so we've got to have at least, what is that,
If it's a
18
big enough
hours?
Emergency and a big enough dollar value, we'd probably end up meeting anyways.
Fair enough,
But
fair enough.
I'm-
I mean, it's
let's
not
see
an
what that
unreasonable ask of the board, I'm trying to think through what that means, yeah.
So who's the individual that would? Mike?
Mike's gonna write the check, pull out the card.
Yeah, and he's the person that coordinates the bids, so something, an emergency that the director of finance has reviewed with the board to confirm it's an emergency? I mean,
Deemed an emergency by the director of finance or Mike Engelberg, assistant superintendent of finance.
Let the board president make the decision whether it's an emergency or not.
well, but I don't think that any one of us should be allowed to make decisions for the district, right?
Well,
I
but
mean,
one person may think it's an emergency, one may not. This way, if the president does it, the president's elected by the board, what are you gonna say? Other than maybe you made a bad decision, but so be it, it still moves forward.
I don't know. I mean, you're talking about spending district dollars and
Right.
having those decisions made by the administrators that we as a whole board have hired and placed in charge of that feels different to me than a single board member making that call on a
But why
Saturday
would an
night.
administrator, other than the finance director, who's gonna be writing the check, well, then do you want it to be his call? Whether it's an emergency or not?
I think so.
Well, I think I'm with Dr. Krebs that we need a little something around that. I mean,
Well, that's all I'm trying to do is
Yeah.
figure out what, let's narrow it down. Either, that's why I said maybe let the president make the decision whether it's an emergency. So the assistant finance or the finance director isn't on the hook as a whole, but you want to put him on the hook, he's the guy that writes the checks.
What happens when a well goes out? We don't get a call. Who decides that well's gotta start or we can't start school tomorrow? Who makes that call right now?
Yeah, but it's still under the
Superintendent.
threshold, who cares?
Pardon?
It's under the threshold.
Who cares, right?
Yeah, these would be things where it would be exceeding the threshold.
Right.
Or that would,
$20,000?
26.
Yeah, that doesn't even, $26,000 doesn't even sound like an emergency to me. It's gonna be somewhere these things are gonna be a lot of money usually. And I guess the definition would be, does it prohibit school from opening tomorrow morning? If so, then.
It's a safety issue, kind of,
Yeah, I mean-
there's several different things it could be that could be.
Yeah, that's the thing, defining what it could be could
Right.
take
Well, when you
us.
try to make a
month.
list, that's, you can't make it inclusive.
no, right, you would never be able, we'd be here for days trying to.
That's what I
We
said,
let that guy over there in the
one
corner
person
decide if it's a snowstorm, was bad enough to open the school or not. That's an
So
emergency.
it feels like if we had somebody, or if we made somebody accountable.
That's why I'm just trying to narrow it down to a person to let them do it. That's what we decided on, so be it.
Dr. Outlaw, who would you appoint to do that?
Yeah.
Yourself?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm gonna sign it. That's
Done.
So
As
determined by the superintendent.
There you go.
He determines it has to be done, it has to be done.
It's fair enough.
Okay.
We were unanimous on something.
All right, so 3302,
What I give it to you. I did.
Let me see 3302, please, Dr. Outlaw.
Okay. 3302. The board may may include the optional language which delegates limited authority to the superintendent to complete required documents related to the acquisition of real property. Page here, option B aligns with our current policy. So the recommendation there would be adopt the optional language, paragraph B.
And as I read that, it would still, like any actual sale, transfer, purchase of real property would still require specific board approval. So this just gives the superintendent the ability to affect whatever the board has otherwise approved, right?
That's my understanding.
Not pizza.
Well, and then if we say, like if we said we were negotiating a purchase of real estate and said, we're authorizing, in a closed session, we're authorizing the superintendent to offer up to, an X amount. This gives him the authority to negotiate the parameters. He may end up negotiating something less than that.
Right.
So.
I don't have any concerns with the administration's recommendation there.
Guess everyone else okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. 3303, we actually made a recent change to this gifts and donations policy. Go with the summer, maybe in this, can't remember exactly, May, to adjust those amounts and the recognitions. So the board accepts gifts and donations of greater than $10,000, or superintendent or designee can accept gifts of less than $10,000. So the recommendation is in A3, use that current language, which is what our current policy was just adjusted to in recent months. And then in B, optional language regarding the district soliciting donations and procedure for making a donation. The recommendation is adopt that optional language.
Anybody have any concerns?
Individual will be responsible for all costs and liability related to solicitation and received notice to become the district's property.
For instance, so a student goes out and put a group of students together and they go out to get donations for their project X. They have authorization from the coach or teacher from project X. None of that liability flows to the student, right?
I read it to be if it's sanctioned by the school, then no. But if it's not sanctioned by the school, in other words, maybe it's not something we want them to raise money for. So if we didn't sanction it, then they would be liable for anything that may happen as a result of it.
Well, that's not how I read that. We're looking at B2, right? An individual wishing to solicit donations on behalf of the district must obtain prior written approval from the superintendent or designee before representing any affiliation with the district.
Makes sense.
Unless otherwise agreed by the superintendent or designee, the individual will be responsible for all costs and liability related to the solicitation, and received donations will become the property of the district, or the district's property, sorry.
So yeah, we're making people liable.
We're not making them liable, they already are.
So if they go to, so let's say somebody, a child or a family goes to a business and says, hey, we're raising funds for something, and this business writes them a check for $500. And then that $500 never gets turned over to the organization or the district. Right, then that's what then they they're responsible for that. Right, that's what it relates to.
Right.
As I understand.
Unless we specifically agree to take on that liability. So the natural state of things is that the individual conducting the solicitation would be responsible for any liability associated with how they do that, unless the district has assumed that liability.
Well,
And this,
That's what did we do? Nothing?
I don't recall. Mr. Scaling, which policy section did this one line up with?
As best I could find would be 7510.
So the use of school facilities one?
Oh, I'm sorry. I misplaced here. Sorry, 7230.
There it is. The current policy doesn't address the liability of the individuals conducting solicitation. It talks more about the district needing to recognize and accept the gifts over, and the board has to approve anything over 10. Gifts, grants, and bequests shall become the property of the board and will be subject to use by the district as determined by the policies and administrative guidelines, applying to all properties, equipment, materials, and funds owned by the board. The equipment purchased by a parent organization for use in the district or at a district-related event shall be submitted to the board prior to purchase, so it can be determined if the district would incur any liability by its use. And the board reserves the right to not accept such liability and thus deny the use of the equipment by students or district employees. So it doesn't talk about the solicitation phase, so that would be new if we adopt this policy as written.
So we would eliminate all the other, but that would be gone when it comes up. We're not putting this on top of that. That's gonna go away.
Correct.
So technically, we're making our students liable.
I don't think we're making them because we're not creating a liability that wouldn't exist under the law. We're just acknowledging that it is where it is and the district hasn't assumed any of that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that, let's say we send your child to Brand X and they bring home a donation, they turn it in, it's received like it's supposed to be. But what happens if it's not for the student?
That's what this is dealing with. The student doesn't turn it in and they take it or the family takes the donation and uses it for their own, I mean, it's embezzlement, really. I mean, at
Sure,
that
it is.
point.
Oh, sure.
Right.
So the law
So-
takes over.
Well,
The distinction I'm trying to make is that exists regardless of whether we adopt a policy that says it's so.
I'm fully aware of that.
Yeah.
The problem is that we don't want to do anything that would discourage our business teams from going out. Okay, so is this going to discourage the young people that are 15 years old as their parents read this? Or is this going to help them know that they have a policy in place that this is how we do it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I would hope that it wouldn't discourage anybody, right? Because it doesn't create anything new, and it does, by acknowledging that exists, at least makes it more clear and transparent than it is without this policy language. And it opens an avenue for conversation about whether there's a specific situation where the district is going to, let's say it's a fundraiser where the money will only come into the district's hands. So we're going to specifically say that doesn't apply here. Something like that.
I would think that the individual should be the supervising individual, should be the liable party. Not
So
the
you-
16-year-old,
So you want to create liability on the district for
I would say-
the activities of
In
others.
this situation, I don't know what I want to create. I'm just thinking brainstorm for a second. But rather than the individual, could be anybody, it could be a 12-year-old. Just give me a second. The person supervising the activity, which would be the adult, should be the liable party to make sure that this was handled correctly. I don't think that we should put liability on minors and kids that have adults and supervisors from their parents or the person organizing the, we say Brand X donation that's running the special event. I'm just thinking out loud for a
well,
second.
legally, the
That's
parent or
fair.
guardian is going to be responsible.
Correct.
I mean, it's not, I mean, they
It's not
can't,
gonna change.
a company can't write a check to 12-year-old Johnny.
You
It's,
can use a different name.
well, but my point is, well, Jimmy, 12-year-old Jimmy, there we go.
Thank you.
12-year-old Jimmy, if 12-year-old Jimmy is given $50 in cash by some business and Jimmy goes and buys $50 worth of candy, the parent and doesn't turn it in, the parents are, the parents are they're gonna have to be ultimately responsible. Legally,
And I think this states the obvious, if you didn't realize it or not, if your son, I'll just say, doesn't give it to the school, then you're responsible for it and there's no really getting out of it.
Which is fine, like I said. There's no getting out anyway, as long as we find out about it. Because it's criminal act, not.
Right.
Yeah.
So, all right. Fine. But I don't want to deter anyone from being free to go do what they want to do because this policy, I'm not going to say, hey, you're not touching any of this because this is going to lock you up when you're 15. That's ridiculous because somebody else could have messed it up and it looks like somebody else, right? So.
so are we good with that policy?
Okay, so join me, you're happy with this?
Works for me.
All right.
Mr. Meyer, just one thing real
Can we
quick.
get,
We're getting closer to our time. I'm wondering if we could take the last 5 minutes to maybe do one more and then like 5 minutes to like figure out what we're going to do next because we're going to need more time. So we didn't get very far today.
Yeah.
So
We probably have 2 more meetings at
least-
this pace.
at least
So-
you've got over 30 more policies to review. So
Well, if I don't come, it'll go faster.
long discussions, the last 2 meetings too.
That's not necessarily true. My point, I guess I was gonna say earlier, but it'll take 1 second just to do it. Can we just get some heads up on it so we're all on the same page and then we can add it to that night's whatever? Because I would have loved to have heard that story so I could have done some research myself and come here. That's all I'm asking for.
It just showed up in my office counter at about 3 in the afternoon today. That's it. I walk in the door, I can't open it.
No, I got you, but if you would give us a heads up, hey, I'm gonna be bringing this, then maybe he could have brought some information for
Well,
you.
I don't blame you. They're justifiable. I mean, what am I gonna do?
All right, thanks.
I have a moat on the street. Like I said, I don't have my sign out saying, please come in.
You put your hours up. After 3 o'clock, we'll be discussing tomorrow.
All right, so we're on 33, let's see, 3304, right there.
So I have a question with this one because this goes back to something we were already discussing, this idea of the non-curricular, curricular, extracurricular, co-curricular. So my thoughts were, first of all, seems to start defining non-curricular. And I don't know if because this was earlier, because we did these out of order, if this is now getting to define it, but this is not the way non-curricular education group I was necessarily thinking it when we did our policies in the 5000s.
I requested their explanation of those definitions. I did get that in. I haven't got that back yet. But I did notice this in going through in preparation for today that this was here. I hadn't made that connection until we went through it together. So that would change maybe our thought process, but I don't know that it impacts. It might provide some better direction on what we need to do for the other policy with respect to the fees, was I believe the one that we were referencing. But for here, it does go ahead and define that.
Well, and this one, we've got a fairly complicated use of facilities policy that we came up with ourselves. I know you have floated the idea of having a subcommittee to walk through fees and facility usage anyways. Are you hopeful that that could convene and then have some recommendations in time for it to be an active part of the discussion on this policy section too? So that we're doing those things in tandem rather than just supplanting what we have today with this new policy while still leaving the fees out? Because I think our current fee structure is tied to the current policy pretty tightly. So I think it would be difficult administratively to do one without the other. I just don't know what you're thinking timing wise.
So obviously we'd need to do that. They need to be aligned. So it's a great point on it. My hope was that once we got done with this legwork that we could form that committee. So, because right now you were all buried in this. We're meeting, it seems like every couple days, to talk policy. So I'd like to do it soon. But I don't think that you're going to be able to, I think we're going to need some time because there's a lot to talk about. If this is ready to vote on in September, I would hate to wait until that work's done because that could take a couple months,
Yeah.
potentially.
What do we do from a transition standpoint if we've adopted this policy that has none of the groupings and designations that we have on our fee schedule? So now we have a fee schedule that has no meaning for some period of time. Does that mean we're not charging fees for anything for the next quarter?
So we might have to have a placeholder or something, then when you go back and look at the optional, maybe that's where you align the two, but
Well, or what we could do is, we could, just for the time being, if we're in a position where we're ready to make the transition to true policies, we could, with respect to the fee structure of the facility, we could just bring the existing Neola policy as a placeholder, keep that as part of the overall Troon package temporarily until we can revisit it. So that we at least have continuity regarding that particular issue.
Okay.
I mean, then, otherwise, I would have some concerns about adopting just a completely new interim Troon policy and then going back and, revisiting, revamping it to potentially go back something closer to what we currently have with a modified fee structure. The Troon policy talks about, one of the issues is about whether we allow any, personal use. I mean, we're still doing open swim, right? There's that in and of itself would have to be built into this policy anyway, of the extent to which our facilities are allowed to be used by the members of the community, and, as opposed to just the students. And so I mean, that would be my preference from a timing standpoint, if we're gonna try to keep the gas on the pedal to get to a point where we can adopt the core Troon package, but in this instance, carry through the Neola one, or the modified Neola one that we currently have for continuity purposes.
So let me make sure that I understand then. So instead of adopting some version of Troon's policy 3304, we would, for the initial adoption of the new policy package, pull in, so essentially replace this with our existing use of district property policy, so that we can keep the fee structure and administrative procedures that are attached to it intact while the ad hoc committee reviews our facilities usage practices and fees. And then once they're done and have recommendations, then we will pick up this text and fit that to whatever we want to have going forward as far as usage and fees goes.
That's my preference.
I like that idea.
You said it, articulated it much better than I did, but yes, that would be my preference. Is everyone else on board with that? Okay with that?
So leave it as is, come back to this.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so our current policy would become, just for numbering purposes, 3304.
Yes.
Right? I mean, whatever the number, so now it's 7510. Our current 7510 would become the new 3304 temporarily until we revisit that issue through the ad hoc committee.
Great.
That makes sense, Chad?
It does. The ad hoc committee is to determine the rental fees of the facilities. Is that correct?
It is, but I would suspect that the fee discussion is going to drive the way we describe different categories of things in the policy document. So allowing us to have that fee discussion first, I think you'll get a cleaner policy document in the end.
All right. So this is probably a good spot to stop then and talk about where are we going next?
Great. So, if we could look at our calendars,
So we have the September 6th, next Tuesday,
for the bond.
for the bond.
We may have
One other thing that's gonna jump on there, but we'll talk about that potentially tomorrow. And it may become the meeting like today where there would be an action item on it, where we would have a closed session to talk about that action item. You all know what I'm talking about, so.
And for purposes of timing, the bond portion, what do you anticipate the extent to which we will need to have allocated time for the bond meeting on Tuesday night? I'm just saying, if everyone's here, if we're already gonna be here, and it's not gonna take 2 hours for the bond issues to be discussed, maybe we can pick up and, make hay while the sun shines, and.
So the agenda item that may come to the forefront tomorrow, I think is going to take up a sizable chunk of that 2-hour block. I bet you that probably take at least, 45 minutes to an hour on that topic potentially, with a closed session and then something else to talk about. So the main things for the bond committee, one is solar panels. I know that was one of the big topics. Another one was some of the parking that I shared, some of that parking about that field house. That was 2. And then 3 was to get an update on projects that are continuing into the year. Some of the things that are going to happen this fall. Those are the big 3 topics that we had. We're going to meet with the architects and just, construction team on Thursday to see if there's any other topics. But those were the 3. So I think those are important topics because we need to keep that moving. But I know we need to meet about policy as well. So what do you want to do? Or I don't think we're going to have time to do much policy, if any,
On Tuesday.
on Tuesday. I just think it's going to get grabbed. If not, if that other topic's not on there, I think you could have an hour. I think we could do the bond in an hour and then policy for an hour.
Well, then I guess maybe we'll play it by ear and, and see if we're gonna potentially have some additional time. And if we are, unless people really have an objection to using that additional time, we gotta get through this, and it's hard to find, dates. Otherwise, I would suggest, regardless of what happens, we're not gonna finish this on Tuesday night. So I would suggest having Star send out, a doodle poll, or figure out some potential dates where we can, and I would say probably, at least a couple.
I may just send something out to the board and say, here's some dates if it
That's
doesn't
fine.
work, because the doodles, I get some response and then it's never works. Then I have to pick a date and then,
So I think we should put 3 more dates on the calendar
I
for
think so
this.
too. And then maybe the third one is an optional, but
Yeah. if
we're probably going to need it.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's definitely not going to be on the 12th, the 12th meeting. There's,
The regular business meeting, the 12th.
Regular board meeting.
yeah. Did you want to use any of that time on the 12th, or just have a regular board meeting? Because we have a future action.
The introduction of the teachers
Yeah,
that night.
we do have a lot of stuff on that agenda, so probably not. So, okay,
But we could use the workshop night. The second
definitely.
Monday.
Yeah, that one for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll throw out a few dates, and the one thing that we had talked about possibly doing, and I think at the beginning we talked about it, was as we got later on with some of the ones that were more debatable, we were like, what should we do? We had talked about maybe seeing if somebody from Troon could maybe join us to answer some of those. Maybe that's something we talk about with, once we get through the basics, when we get to the ones that were kind of questionable.
Yeah.
Where there's more dialogue, maybe that's something we could do, but
Yeah, that might not be a bad idea, because there's
Yeah.
something,
Like,
question
yeah.
they might be able to answer.
right.
The contact there that kind of facilitates the whole process for this implementation has indicated that when there's questions about a policy, that is channeled to those who deal with that particular piece of it most. So getting one person that can speak
That
to
makes
all the
sense.
dynamics
Okay.
was communicated to me that might be different. So he recommended that I send the questions to him that we've had. He will send those out and bring the responses back. So just keep that in mind. If it's really, we've got a financial question, we've got a student discipline question, we've got a Title IX question, one person may not be able to answer all 3 of those in the manner that we need.
So, okay.
All right. All right. I'll send some times. But we'll keep spending our evenings together here until we get this done. I think 2 or 3 more times, I think we will get there.
Start with saying she'd bring the sandwiches.
So are you requesting sandwiches?
I'm not necessarily gonna be here for this policy meeting, but I'm just gonna work through them,
Okay.
but I just recall that she'd at least feed us,
I had snacks at one of them.
whatever.
I, Laura and I always brought muffins for the policy committee meetings. Y'all were missing out.
Huge breakfast, right?
Yep.
Meeting's adjourned. Nice chair.